Hello class. Today we're going to be looking at some information and you're going to be writing down some discussion notes about the time period of Reconstruction. And you have, I believe, a Venn diagram with 3 circles in it that you will want to be taking the plan's information on. And when you're done with that, we will talk about what you're going to do with that information, how you're going to manipulate it. So today, let's talk a little bit about Reconstruction, the time period between 1865 and 1877. Please feel free to stop wherever you need to in order to get the notes down or to write down something that I've said to add to the information. So this time period of Reconstruction, as I said, was an era from 1865 to 1877. But the word Reconstruction means that in order to bring the Union and the Confederacy together again, the North and the South together, it's going to take time to rebuild physically and geographically, economically, politically, to bring the two sides back together under one nation, and socially because of the end of slavery. So it isn't just a physical rebuilding of buildings and land. It's a reconstruction of the relationship between the North and the South in every way possible. So let's take a look at 3 of the plans that were put in place for Reconstruction. The first one we're going to talk about is Lincoln's plan. And Lincoln's plan is sometimes known as wartime Reconstruction. Sometimes they refer to it as the 10% plan. And that is because he believed in pardoning all Southerners, except for high-ranking officials. He believed that 10% of the state's voters had to swear loyalty to the Constitution. Then they could form a state government and send representatives to Congress. Thus the name 10% Plan. And the third thing was that they had to abolish slavery, which, remember, the Emancipation Proclamation was only a wartime step. It did not abolish slavery everywhere and for all time. That had to happen with an amendment known as the 13th Amendment. So Lincoln's plan is very lenient. It's very simple. It's a very basic Republican plan that he had thought about prior to the end of the war as well as before his assassination. Now, because he's assassinated, he can't fulfill his promise of this Reconstruction plan, but his vice president, who will take over for him, Andrew Johnson, is going to put in place the presidential Reconstruction plan, which is very similar to Lincoln's, pardoning every Southerner except for the high-ranking officials, every state ratifying the 13th Amendment, and 10% of the voters swearing loyalty to the Constitution. And when you think about it, that was a very positive step for him to make. Andrew Johnson is not a Republican, he's a Democrat. He's from the South, he's from Tennessee. So the fact that he even agrees and wants to implement Lincoln's plan is pretty spectacular. Unfortunately, Johnson is no Lincoln, and he's going to have a hard time persuading the Congress that this is the way to go, because Congress really wants to punish the South. Lincoln and Johnson were not necessarily how do I want to say this? Lincoln and Johnson were not necessarily convinced that the South were supposed to leave the Union. They legally were not allowed to leave the Union, so coming back into the Union should have been a very simple step. If you don't believe that they actually did it legally, then to come back in should not take quite as much work. So Johnson is faced with persuading the Congress of his Reconstruction plan, but the radical Republicans of the Congress have another plan, and this is called Congressional Reconstruction. Their points need to be that the South would have to be governed by the military. In other words, be put under martial rule. And no state government would come back into the Union until each state swears their loyalty to the Constitution, abolishes slavery, there's your 13th Amendment, recognizes citizenship for African Americans, and allows African American males the right to vote, the 15th Amendment. So these three amendments, known as the Civil War Amendments, are absolutely crucial to the states of the South coming back into the Union. They also believed that no Confederate leaders should or could vote or hold office. So this was an extremely difficult plan to put into place. They wanted the Southern people to understand that they had done something wrong, and it was going to take some work on their part to do this. Lincoln, on the other hand, felt that this should be a very quick Reconstruction, one that would allow the states to rejoin very quickly. The quicker they got together, the quicker Reconstruction could begin. It would have been lenient and simple, but these radical Republicans had another agenda. They really wanted these amendments to be put into place because they wanted protection for African Americans. They also wanted some help for these African Americans in terms of land rights and making sure that they felt protected by someone. The federal government most likely, certainly wouldn't be the states. So they really wanted to make it clear to the states that the states would have to do some work before they could rewrite their constitutions, their state constitutions. And you will see that each one of the numbered areas was controlled by a particular general. Schofield was in 1, Sickles was in 2, Pope was in 3, not like the Pope in Rome. Commander Ord was in 4, and then Sheridan was in 5. So each one of these areas had to be controlled by a commanding general, and they were responsible for protecting these newly freed slaves, these new freed men, and making sure that Reconstruction went as presented to them. So the timeline of Reconstruction kind of runs a little bit like this. In 1865, Lincoln is assassinated, the 13th Amendment passes, Johnson announces his plan. 1866, Congress votes to continue the Freedmen's Bureau. Southern states begin to pass those black codes, but Congress passes the Civil Rights Act, and Johnson vetoes the Freedmen's Bureau and the Civil Rights Act, but Congress overrides the veto. So you can see that separation of powers is really coming into play here. In 1867, Congress takes control of Reconstruction, passes the Congressional Reconstruction Act. Johnson vetoes the act, and Congress overrides the veto. Johnson is impeached because he and the Congress are at odds with each other. So you should be doing some reading on why Johnson is impeached. 1868, the 14th Amendment is passed. A new election. Grant is elected president. Ulysses S. Grant, that is. And in 1870, the 15th Amendment is passed. So take a look at some of the pages that I've instructed you to look at to help you with some of that information as well as the definitions. And we will be talking again about Reconstruction at a later date. Please check the reading pages that I've given you on Edmodo. I've given you a new way to look at some of that information off Edmodo. Okay? I hope you have a great night. You're the macaroni to my cheese, and my cheese to the macaroni.